All right, let's dive in. We're going to follow the incredible journey of some pretty dense academic ideas. Ideas that started in quiet university halls and have ended up on the front lines of our biggest, loudest cultural debates today. We're going to see how philosophy became a full-blown culture war.
So why is everybody fighting about critical theory? You've seen the words everywhere, right? Woke, CRT, postmodernism. They're all over social media, they're shouted at political rallies. But what do they even mean? And how in the world did these academic terms become so explosive? That's the big question we're tackling.
The whole thing really starts in these super complex academic books. But somehow it's jumped from the page, and now it's influencing everything, from the art you see in museums to the arguments you see online. If we can get our heads around that jump, from abstract thought to real-world clashes, we can start to understand what this is all about.
And this, right here, this is the heart of the whole conflict. On one hand, you have the original goal from 1937, to liberate human beings. Pretty straightforward. But then, fast forward to today, and a top critic calls its modern version a new slavery. So how did an idea about freedom get so completely turned on its head? That's the puzzle.
To figure that out, we've got to go back to the beginning. We need to look at the theory's first face, the one that saw itself as a tool for liberation.
So this all starts in Germany in the 1930s with a group called the Frankfurt School. They were living in a really intense time with the rise of fascism, and they were trying to solve a major riddle. Karl Marx had predicted this big workers' revolution, but it never happened. Why? Their answer was that power isn't just about economics, it's also about culture. They believed that things like the media, art, even our own psychology could secretly keep us in our place, making us accept our enslavement. And that led them to their big mission. Theory shouldn't just be about describing the world, it had to be about changing it.
Okay, now let's jump forward a few decades. Over in post-war France, this whole idea of critique takes a really radical turn, and it starts to question something way more fundamental.
A new wave of French intellectuals, who we now call postmodernists, started to critique the very tools we use to understand reality. I mean, think about it. After the absolute horror of World War II, which was driven by these huge, grand ideas, they became super skeptical of anyone claiming to have the answer. Any claim to perfect objectivity, universal reason, or a single capital T truth.
And three thinkers were really central here. You had Lyotard, who basically said we should be suspicious of all meta-narratives. You know, those big stories that claim to explain everything, even science. Then there was Foucault, who argued that power and knowledge are always tied together. He said that what a society decides as true is really just a tool the powerful use to control people. And finally, you have Derrida, who gave us deconstruction. He argued that our language itself is built on hidden power dynamics, what he called violent hierarchies, and that we need to take language apart to expose them.
So what happens when you take these super abstract philosophical concepts and actually try to use them in the real world? Well, that's where we get the rise of what its critics have dubbed applied postmodernism.
This is where, according to the critics, the rubber meets the road. Academics began taking those postmodern tools and applying them to specific identities. This is where we see the birth of fields like post-colonial theory, queer theory, and of course, critical race theory. Each one is designed to deconstruct the specific power structures affecting different groups based on race, gender, sexuality, and so on.
And for critics, like Helen Pluckrose, this was the absolute key moment. This is when, in their view, a method of asking philosophical questions transformed into a full-on program for political action. And publications like Quillette became a major platform for this critique.
Now, this shift from academic theory to real-world activism, it did not go unnoticed. In fact, it ignited a massive backlash that dragged these ivory tower debates right out into the mainstream.
And a real flashpoint for this backlash was the Grievance Studies affair. Get this, in 2018, three scholars, Helen Pluckrose, James Lindsay, and Peter Boghossian, wrote a bunch of totally absurd, fake academic papers. We're talking about topics like rape culture at dog parks. They submitted them to academic journals, and 7 of them were accepted for publication. Their point was to argue that some of these fields had become more about a political agenda than about serious scholarship.
This whole affair led to the huge best-selling book,
cynical theories. And the book's core argument really boils down to this: a clash between two totally different visions of justice. On one side, you have traditional liberalism, which believes progress comes from reason, debate, and universal rights for every individual. On the other, what they call social justice theory, which they say is this applied postmodernism that rejects all that universal stuff in favor of group identity and lived experience.
And the book itself became part of the battle. It got tons of praise from people like Steven Pinker, who said it exposed the shallow intellectual roots of these ideas. But others slammed it, calling it a gloves-off polemic that leaps from history to hysteria. The fact that the reaction was so split just shows how influential and how incredibly divisive the book was. It just poured gasoline on the culture war fire.
Okay, so that brings us right up to today. With all that history in our back pocket, let's take a look at the battlefield as it stands right now.
And you know, the language being used is just incredibly intense. As one example, the Southern Poverty Law Center quotes James Lindsay, one of the key figures in the backlash, making this really provocative claim. This kind of rhetoric shows you just how high the emotional stakes have gotten.
And this isn't just talk, it's having huge real-world effects. The SPLC has identified Lindsay as a key voice in certain propaganda movements. At the same time his use of terms like groomer took off, there was a reported and staggering 2,465% increase in related hate online. Meanwhile, political operators like Chris Rufo are on the record saying they use Lindsay's theory to build actual political campaigns, like the one against critical race theory in schools.
So we're left with these two camps that seem like they can't even speak the same language. One side is screaming that a new intolerant ideology is censoring free speech and attacking reason itself. And the other side is arguing that this whole defense of reason is just a cover for rolling back progress and silencing important critiques of power.
Which brings us to the final fundamental question. After this entire journey, from German philosophers to French intellectuals to today's Twitter battles, what are we really looking at? Is this a genuine battle over the nature of truth and how to make the world a better place? Or is it exactly what Foucault might have said it was all along, just a raw struggle for power?